Our next speaker for this evening is Erika May-McNichol. Please welcome her to the stage.
So I'm here to talk about women in comedy, and when Cody asked and Casey asked me to do something about something, I thought I'd just come and talk to you guys about things I think are funny. So that's what this is. I don't have as academic as a premise as Jestro and Buckman, but we'll get going. So forward, please, into the fog. I'm going to kind of divide up my speech into 3 parts, and that's to give you a context of the history of women in comedy, a glib comparison of female and male comedians, and then if there's time, I'll just hold forth until they cut me off. All right, let's go to the next one. So, an abbreviated history. So, the first funny lady, way back 10 to 25,000 years ago, very first lady comedian came on the scene. She did largely observational comedy about beasts and fowl. She was really well known for her wit, and so, her partner was like, let's get together a group, and she agreed in a moment of probably not sticking up for herself very well to call it Adam and His Rib. And so they started doing shows all over Paradise. It was a big hit. Everyone loved it. Finally, they started getting asked to do some festival circuits. They knew they made it big when the dinosaurs were like, hey, come do your show for us in a dinosaur comedy festival. Eventually, she broke off and became her own one-woman writing and performance show. But by then, it was soured. All the other folks that were in high positions decided that she shouldn't be around Paradise anymore. And once she started doing 2-person things with a serpent, she was cast out of the Garden of Paradise. And so women in comedy was really set back for a long time. Until we got to vaudeville. And this, as you can probably tell, my speech is not necessarily academic. I haven't gone through and done serious studies. So if I look over your favorite lady comedian, let's talk about it, and you can share clips with me, and it'll all come out in the wash. But vaudeville, so vaudeville's really interesting, and this is an era that I wasn't really familiar with, but until I started watching, actually, Marx Brothers films. And something that's really interesting to me is when vaudeville kind of became larger, people were touring, the biggest stars in vaudeville, with the Marx Brothers kind of being some exception to that, and maybe some Al Jolsons, were the women. And the hypothesis is that women were more pleasant to look upon. They could sing and dance. And so a woman who was both funny and could sing and dance could make a shitload of money in vaudeville. And there are several examples of this. And they were actually some of the wealthiest women in the country at that point in time. So you've got like Ethel Merman and Fanny Bryce, Margaret Dumont, who was later in the Marx Brothers shows. But one person that I want to call out that wasn't directly involved in vaudeville, but probably made the biggest contribution to this kind of era of comedy and what later went on to be the Marx Brothers empire was Minnie Marx. She was the mother of the Marx Brothers, and if you look at the history of the Marx family, their father was a dancer and then a very shitty tailor. And so he would have to bribe people off. I don't think he refused to use measuring tapes. So often his hem work was very bad, and so they would have to bribe people off by him cooking them food, which is one of his true talents. Minnie Marx, on the other hand, was the daughter of a ventriloquist and an opera singer. And so she had grown up around performance. Her brother later became a comedian of some note, and it's hypothesized that she was really the one that taught them kind of their sense of comedic timing and their ensemble. So she definitely had a very indelible mark in the success of the Marx Brothers in the vaudeville period. I want to also talk about someone who I think everyone knows about, Lucille Ball. I feel like that's a ridiculous question, but there's also people that were born in 1992 in this room, so We all know who Lucille Ball is, right? So, yeah. So she was actually, she became the first female movie mogul. She formed a production company with her husband, Desi, called Desi Lou, and they produced the I Love Lucy show, which was a huge hit. That production company actually later became the production company for series like Star Trek and Mission Impossible. She continued to try to perform, after I Love Lucy had kind of faded from memory, but never quite reached that kind of first pinnacle of success that she had with the I Love Lucy show. And so anyone who loves I Love Lucy loves this next clip that I'm going to ask them to put up. This is the Chocolate Factory sketch, and the setup here is that they've been asked to wrap these chocolates as quickly as possible. The stakes are set up, and you can kind of see the ridiculousness unfold. So cue that beautiful clip.
What are you doing up here? Oh,
That show. All right, so moving on, Elaine May is incredible. I actually wasn't familiar with her work in like any large detail until I started hanging out with my husband, Bob McNichol, who's an archivist of all things media. And Elaine May and Mike Nichols, Dave mentioned them in his duo chats, was an incredibly witty. She was also very attractive, which helped her kind of carry over to the screen very easily. But she started with the Compass Players in Chicago while attending the University of Chicago, and which later became Second City. And what I think is really, they met cute. Mike Nichols and he had observed her doing some sketch work and was really taken with her wit and talent, and actually saw her in the Randolph CTA station and sat down next to her and in a Russian accent asked her if he could sit down, please. And she replied without blinking, "If you wish." And so they went through this little like Russian spy thing, and I think eventually they decided to do comedy together. But she's an incredibly insightful woman, and I wasn't able to find the clip that I really would like to show, just because at Mike Nichols' death, the folks that hold the copyrights to the Nichols and May stuff kind of scoured the internet and made people remove it. But this particular clip, I think, is a good demonstration of the characters that she would do. And it's Mike Nichols calling his mother. It'll actually start in the middle of the sketch, so you're going to kind of miss some of the setup, but you get a sense for her comedic chops. So if you've never checked out Elaine May, Nichols and May stuff, I highly suggest it. There's a really wonderful sketch that I wanted to do instead. It's two teenagers kind of meeting and making out in a car. And she does this really wonderful thing that I've aped before for my own comedic purposes, where they're making out and her hand is here, and it's kind of crawling around on her face as she's trying to make out with Mike Nichols. So she's amazing, very good. Imogene Coca. So your show of shows, pretty significant in terms of comedy canon. I believe Woody Allen wrote for the show, as well as being a huge Sid Caesar show of shows. So Sid Caesar was kind of the main writer behind it. But Imogene Coca and he were a pretty consistent duo, and she had this kind of very rubbery face and like physicalization that reminds me a lot of like what you see with Kristen Wiig when she's kind of doing her more demonstrative and physical character. So I found this clip, and I found it so delightful. They are basically pretending like they are doing all of the percussion work for the overture of 1812, or the 1812 overture. And so go ahead and play that sweet reel. So from the 1950s, there were certainly female comedians in the 60s. I don't mean to give you that impression that nothing happened then. We had people like Phyllis Diller, and I really haven't touched on a lot of the stand-ups. I'm going to focus mainly on people that were either individuals that ended up carrying over into sketch or were heavily into character work. So the next set, let's go to the next slide. So SNL kind of started. But prior to that, you had, the Mary Tyler Moore Show that started in the 1970s. Also the Carol Burnett Show that ended up running for about 11 years. And then you had people like Lily Tomlin. She started as a stand-up and then moved to Rowan and Martin Laugh-In. She has a lot of notable characters, and if you have ever seen the sketch on SNL where it's the "we don't care, we don't have to, we're the phone company," that was her character, Ernestine. She also did another little precocious character named Edith Ann, who would kind of sit in a big rocking chair and talk about making disgusting sandwiches and kind of seeing inappropriate adult behavior. And it's really interesting in kind of researching Lily Tomlin for the speech. She's one of only 3 women who's ever won a Grammy for her solo album, the other 2 of which are Whoopi Goldberg and Kathy Griffin. So she also, for those of you that are a little bit younger, if you watch The Magic School Bus, she was the voice of Miss Frizzle, Miss Frizzell. I have to watch that ad nauseum, so I was driven crazy by whose voice is this for a long time, and then I finally looked it up and made the connection. So other folks that are on this list, I don't necessarily have clips for them. Obviously, Gilda Radner, I'm not going to spend a lot of time or have specific clips for her. I think anyone who saw the SNL anniversary show saw lots of send-ups to Gilda Radner and was incredibly talented. Rosanna Dana, and kind of the awkward characters that she would play with Bill Murray were delightful. This next clip that I wanted to play actually includes Gilda Radner, Jane Curtin, and Lorraine Newman, as well as Lily Tomlin. It's a very short clip of when Lily Tomlin was on SNL and had this sketch that was basically about male sexual harassment. So that was segueing into probably one of my personal favorites, Carol Burnett. As I mentioned, she had her own show. The Carol Burnett Show launched the careers of people such as Vicki Lawrence, who later did Mama's Family, Tim Conway, take him or leave him. And she was incredibly talented, and actually the Carol Burnett Show kind of came out of her love of song, dance, and sketch. So this clip that I am going to be playing is actually from Annie, where she does a song with Albert Finney, who is playing Daddy Warbucks. Singing and ladies! Oh, so good. Jane Curtin, of course, is the person on Point and Counterpoint with Dan Aykroyd, for which this quote-unquote speech is named, Jane, You Ignorant Slut. Also an excellent straight woman, as mentioned in Dave's speech. Let's go to the next slide, just because I want to be careful of time. So 80s and 90s were a great time for especially stand-up comedy, as stand-up comedy became kind of de rigueur in terms of the comedic appetite of America. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Rosie O'Donnell or Ellen DeGeneres, and then the return of Phyllis Diller on Hollywood Squares. But that's where I did learn about Phyllis Diller myself growing up. But someone that I do want to spend some time on is Jan Hooks. She recently passed away, and if you were not familiar with Jan Hooks' work before she passed away, or you saw Pee-wee's Big Adventure, she is the tour guide in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and she just had an incredible knack, especially in her work with Phil Hartman. The scene or the sketch that they did that was just so beautifully textured, and it was funny, and it was also sweet and a little bit heartbreaking. Life is a Dream, rather. I'm not going to show that here, but I did want to show a sketch that's not well known amongst people that watch SNL, or at least it wasn't to me until a couple of years ago when I started revisiting her work. But this is a sketch that includes her, Nora Dunn, who she did the Sweeney Sisters with, and then also a very thin Alec Baldwin. Oh, Brenda the Waitress. Such a good sketch. I am way over my time, so I'm just you guys are familiar with Golden Girls. And let's go to the next slide, where I was gonna be like, hey, these guys, right? They're awesome. If you haven't seen Broad City, check it out. There's a clip. Amy Sedaris showing them a terrible apartment. So if you have not seen Broad City, no jokes, go see it. It's really awesome. So I'm going to just go ahead and wrap it up. But general conclusion is that, women have been in comedy for quite some time. And so I think especially more recently, you've seen women evolve from kind of a foil for a comedic, traditionally male counterpart, with some exception, to people that are actually producing their own shows. And I think with the advent of people being able to have their own web series, produce the web series, get it out there, and as long as it's quality goods, then the market will decide whether or not they're able to reach a wider audience than they have previously. I also wanted to just offer for anyone in the room, I myself in the continued self-talk and self-awareness of things that you think. If you've ever been putting together a show or a troupe and you found yourself thinking this, these guys are good, but I need 2 girls. Check what logic that stems from. Women can actually contribute, as you've seen in the sketches that I've shown and kind of the rich history of women in comedy. They can be physical, they can be witty, they can be schlubby, they can be incisive, they can be a straight man, or they can also drive a scene. So stop thinking, if you have found yourself in this thought pattern in the past of women simply as a kind of quota to fill, versus someone who can bring character as well as a unique point of view to whatever show that you might be producing or putting together. So with that, I'll close.
Well, that's it for this episode of Got Your Back's Comedy Nerd Out. We want to say thank you for watching. If you'd like to check out more episodes from us at Got Your Back Podcast, you can go to GYBpodcast.com for episodes, or you can search for Got Your Back on whatever podcasting service you use. iTunes, Stitcher, we're on all of them. If you could drop us a rate and review, we would also appreciate that as well.